I'm Neil Acharya.
And I'm Nate Sager.
And welcome to SportsLit. Today our guest is Dan Robson. He's a senior writer at Sportsnet, and his writing has also appeared in the Canadian Press, on the CBC, and in the Toronto Star. He is the author of the bestseller Quinn, The Life of a Hockey Legend, and co-author of bestsellers The Crazy Game, How I Survived in the Crease and Beyond with Clint Malarchuk, and Change Up, How to Make the Great Game of Baseball Even Better with Buck Martinez. His feature writing has included The Boys of Whale Cove, about a First Nations youth hockey team, which was selected in the Best Canadian Sports Writing Anthology. Of course, Stacey May was on our show a couple of episodes ago, and we talked a little bit about that. And most recently, he wrote What It Takes, which is about two-time Stanley Cup winner Kevin Stevens and his battle with addiction. Today, of course, we're here to discuss primarily his fourth book, Killer, My Life in Hockey, about Maple Leaf legend Doug Gilmour. I guess you could say this is an autobiography written in the first person. And Nate, I'm going to bring you in here. We're two Kingston guys. And 9 years ago, you wrote a blog post right before Mr. Gilmour's banner went up into the rafters of the Air Canada Centre. And it was called, the title was Dougie Defined Us Fully Completely. Being a Leaf fan, me and you were both Leaf fans during that era. The runs to the conference final. What were your takeaways? I'd like you to just read a little bit from your blog post from back then.
Okay, yeah, and this would be 9 years old next week, and it was like to say Dougie defined us fully completely. And it's like the analogies with Doug Gilmour fall short, just like the Leafs have so often. The best stab of fighting through any ambivalence on the eve of Gilmour's big night in Toronto is to say that for 2 years, 1993 and 94, he was an exemplar of something that courses through Canadians on a chromosomal level. Plain and simple, he was best summed up by what he didn't have, which is, I think, something next to godliness in the Great White North, eh? There's this passage in Roy McGregor's cult hockey novel, and I know it's like hacky to quote someone to have their words stand in for yours, but Roy McGregor's cult hockey novel, The Last Season, which I think really explains why being great and being loved can be not necessarily exclusive things, but are two different things. There's this scene in the novel where a small-town hockey coach, Ted Sugar Bowles, closes a pregame pep talk to the protagonist team by saying, "What makes a shark truly unusual is what he doesn't have, and that's a swim bladder. A shark has to keep moving constantly. A shark does not float like other fish. He has no swim bladder, see? He can't let up for a minute, and that's what makes him talk dog." And you think of Doug Gilmour, he was 160 pounds soaking wet. He was the number 134 overall pick in the 1982 draft, and he's in the Hall of Fame. So Gilmour in 93 and 94 for Kingston guys, and for people who are Leaf fans, he was our shark. And either you got at that, or I don't even think you needed to explain to it. You just got it. The same way when you heard five other Kingston guys, Gord, Johnny, Rob, Paul, the other Gord, you just got it. They were particular to their time. He even tragically were just both particular to a time and a place. And like I say, like the shark, Doug Gilmour just had to keep moving. And I think in the end that sometimes gets a player more adulation than those guys who just have that sort of like next level skill and grace like Matt Sundin had, or maybe like Austin Matthews has today.
It's interesting too. I mean, you brought up several good points when we discussed what we were going to ask Dan about this book. I really like the point you brought up about the fact that his career is so interesting because I think it's, let's say roughly, was it 20 seasons?
Yeah, 20 seasons in the NHL.
The first 10 straddle the pre-Bettman era, and the last 10 are following Bettman, and it's very interesting. And you pointed out, you can really see that in the book, the how the game has changed in terms of salary, in terms of what they're doing on and off the ice, which is something I want to talk to Dan about. And as for, I think it's kind of hard to explain. I think you really nailed it, because a lot of people, especially non-Leaf fans, always wonder why people get excited about two runs to the conference final that fell short of even making it to the Stanley Cup. And for a lot of us, I mean, I know for myself, growing up, as in Kingston, being a Leaf fan, it was the first time I'd seen winning hockey, really, on that level. And of course, he was the leader.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, he falls right into that, he post-Harold Ballard, sort of pre-MLSE era. Like, Doug Gilmour never played a game for the Leafs at Air Canada Centre. He belongs to those last years at the Gardens and the little renaissance they had under Cliff Fletcher as GM and the late Pat Burns, and I guess Steve Stavros was kind of the controlling owner. And yeah, the Leafs in the 1980s, you look back at it, they didn't have a single season where they finished with more than 80 points. I mean, the team had fallen into really utter disrepute, and when Doug Gilmour came, he represented something. He represented hope, and he was kind of that. And in soccer, they always have that term, the talisman, like for some player, just makes everyone around him better, and he was that guy.
Well, with that said, Dan's going to join us after this brief interlude. Well, Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get right into it. I looked at the press release, and I think they secured the rights to this, HarperCollins, in March. Did you start writing this book prior to that press release being put out? Like, how long did it take you to write the book?
That's a good question. Actually, I started working with Doug in October, about a year before publication. Okay. So I sat down with him, and we sat down about once a week at Originals Bar up in Leaside over lunch, and just had a beer and a sandwich and chatted for a couple of hours. And so that's how I started. And then that process went on for a few months. And then I kind of got into the writing in earnest in December, January. And then, yeah.
So how does Dan Robson land the Gilmour book? Is there a process behind the scenes where authors are vying to get a book like this, or is it the subject is choosing you to write? How does that work?
In this case, so I have a literary agent that I work with, that I've worked with since I first wrote a book. He was sort of the guy I represented as Rick Broadhead. And in some cases, a publisher will come with a project and say, we'd like you to do this project. In other cases, it's Rick going out and talking to athletes and saying, are you interested in writing a book? In this case, I believe it was Rick that had been sort of talking to Doug for a while. And over the years, Doug's been asked dozens of times to write a book, and the timing was just kind of finally right. So Rick actually connected both of us. We had a meeting by phone and met one day in the bar to talk about it, and it went from there.
You've written 3 books previous to this, correct?
4 actually. No, 3 previous. Yeah, 4 total. Yeah.
So this is your 4th book, and obviously, I mean, right in the thank yous, you talk about going to your first Leaf game, and obviously Doug Gilmour, this is 93 roughly. So I'm assuming you didn't probably grow up watching Clint Malarchuk or maybe Pat Quinn later on, but did this have special meaning to you, this book, of in relation to the other 3?
Yeah, the point about that I write about in the acknowledgments of just that childhood memory of watching that team that Doug was leading and understanding sort of feeling the magic of being in Maple Leaf Gardens. So something I could actually feel quite viscerally, and meeting him. I was actually quite nervous to meet him for the first time, and I'm usually pretty good about stuff like that, but because of the place he held sort of in my childhood, and sort of having that gap over years of sort of not interacting with him at all, or not getting to meet him, meeting him then, it just sort of threw me back to that time. So it felt special. I mean, I've enjoyed writing all the books I've done, but this felt unique in a way that I was able to experience something that I'd imagined many years ago.
I've never really encountered Doug Gilmour personally, a few times through interviews, but he strikes me as the type of guy who'd have to warm up to you before he would probably reveal much about himself. Was that the case?
Yeah, it's interesting. He's incredibly kind and welcoming right away. So if you were to meet him, he shake your hand and know your name and ask questions about you. He's kind of has that average Joe kind of, I'm not a big star kind of mentality, but he is a big star, and he meets a ton of people. It took, I wouldn't say it was difficult to sort of crack into his sort of what's going on inside, but it took a little while. He's used to talking to a lot of reporters, and this process is different than that. It's not just about talking about hockey and your favorite hockey memories. It's about talking about life and talking about his parents and his family and stuff. So we had to kind of get there, but that really was sort of a natural conversation. And then once you're there, you're there.
So did you you just went to Originals and brought a tape recorder? And that's
so that's what I brought. I bring a tape recorder. I brought a notepad, but I rarely actually use a use a notepad when I'm writing, especially in a situation like that, because for a book like this, I actually get everything transcribed. So I'll pay to have it all just like written out so that I can go back and look at it and rewrite it. But then it's just, there's so much content that I need to have access to every conversation we had. So in that case, I can just sort of set the recorder down and we can just chat. And that also puts him at ease too, because we're just talking. It's not for an article. It's not for anything like that. We're just talking about his life.
Well, here at SportsLit, a couple episodes, we decided in the spirit of Nardwar that we want to give a gift to our guest. So 2 episodes ago with Stacey May Fowles, we invited her out to a Blue Jay game. Last week, or a couple weeks ago, with Carl Subban, we gave him the autobiography of Marvin Barnes, who was his childhood hero growing up. And so we weren't sure what to get you, but here's your gift.
Well, this is kind of you. Thank you.
Yes, I would love to say they're brand new. They're not, but you'll see what that is. I know you got to be delicate there, but this is.
That's awesome.
They're a couple of they're a couple of original Ale House mugs. I figured to bring you back to your time working with Doug.
That is so thoughtful. Thank you so much. I thank you for reading the back of the book and the mention of originals. That is lovely, and actually, it will remind me of that. That's special. Now, I have a question. Were these just sort of a walkout after a couple of pints?
I went in last night, and of course, me, as Nate knows, I'm always on time for things. I wanted to get a shirt. They said, okay, come by any time. But I didn't know it meant during when the manager was in. So I came in at 10 o'clock last night to buy the shirt, and they were like, you can't get into the manager's office at 10 o'clock. So then I offered to buy some glasses, and they were nice enough to give me those glasses, and then they actually remembered you guys in there working on the books.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, thank you to Originals, and thank you for such a thoughtful gesture.
No problem. But I thought it might jog your memory, and maybe you have a couple of stories. When you were in there writing, did people approach you guys? Were you in the back somewhere? How did that work?
Yeah, all the time. Actually, we went. We'd go like right at open. So and Doug knew the owners so well that they actually wouldn't be there. He'd go in the back door, and he'd come and unlock the front door for me.
Oh, wow.
And it was very. I at first I was like, this seems weird, but
it's like a gangster movie.
Yeah, he was just so well known that he'd be there, and Doug is like, he's always early, and it was sort of a thing like I'm. Generally not, and he'd be like, because he's coming from Burlington, and so he hates the Toronto traffic, so he'd be, and sometimes like I just leave my house, he'd be like, oh, I just got here, I'm like, we're meeting in half an hour, so then I feel bad and I'm rushing there, but he'd come in there, like open the door for me, and we'd sit down, just be the two of us, and then whoever was working that day would come in after and be like, oh, hi Doug, how's it going? Like, it was just it was really interesting to see how connected he was to the community of that place.
Right.
It's a place that he went often when he was living in the area, but he's still connected to the owner and and to all the people who work there. There'd be people making deliveries of beer kegs that he would know. And everyone would come up to him and be like, hey, Dougie, how's it going? And it'd be different than if we were sort of out on the street somewhere and people would be like, oh, that's Doug Gilmour. Right. Inside the bar, it kind of had a real Cheers kind of feel to it. We're just like, hey, it's just Doug. And so that was interesting.
I'm going to take the time now to read a portion of this book. I really felt as though his father was a real kind of theme, a driver in this book. And so I'm just going to read the last part here, which I thought was probably the most moving portion of the book. And I want to ask you how you guys decided to end on this. And so he goes, there was no one quite like Don Gilmour. There was no one like my dad. He was cremated, and we bought a plot in a memorial wall at a gravesite just off Sydenham Road. The route we always took on the way out of Kingston towards the lake. I wanted to be able to give him a wave every time I drive by. A few days later, I was back at my place on Lowborough Lake, going through some of the old things Dad had kept in the garage. I flicked on a dusty old radio that I'd never used to have some tunes to keep me company. Dad was a hoarder, and he stored all the stuff at my place. So there was a lot to go through. He must have had 100 $2 bills hidden away, and he had $4,000 or $5,000 stashed in his shaving kit. I also had 5 of his suitcases. One of them was full of what looked like old newspapers. They were all yellowed and aged. I started to shuffle through the pages. They were newspaper clippings from my entire career, going all the way back to my first years playing junior and pro. All those old pages collected by him told the story of my life. As I sat there poring over them, a familiar tune started playing on the radio. It was Dad's favorite song, and it's Big League. by Tom Cochran, I believe. And then it closes with, I put down the yellowed newsprint, closed my eyes, and started to cry. We made it, Dad, I thought. We did. Thank you. How did you know you wanted to close on that?
When we first discussed writing this book, his dad was one of the first topics that came up. He'd lost his dad a few years before, and when we started discussing why he wanted to do the book now, I think he had some regret that he hadn't done it when his dad was alive, so he could say thank you in that way, because they had it had been such a journey for them, especially in their early years in Kingston, and then later on, and living side by side up at Loughborough Lake for a while. Family really means everything to Doug, and I found that out pretty early. So I just kind of felt, well, we could continue on and talk a little bit more about his time with the Frontenacs and talk about life now. There was just a real natural ending to the story that sort of began in the same place that it ends in a way.
I'm going to get you now to read your thank yous, and the reason I brought that point up not only was to ask you why we kind of, you ended on that, but I felt like it mirrored some of your sentiments in the thank you. So I'll just get you to read right down to there, and then we'll flip over. I'll point it out to you, and then you can start again right at the end. So I'll get
absolutely. When I was about 10 years old, I went to my first Leafs game at Maple Leaf Gardens. Somehow my father had managed to get seats right behind Felix Potvin through the company he worked for. It felt like we won the hockey lottery. I don't recall what happened in the game, but I remember the players, the Cat, Clark, Killer, and company. After seeing them on television and trading cards and on posters on my wall, I was awestruck to see them live skating in front of me. They were like superheroes. I remember trying to hang on to each moment in that stuffy old barn, watching the clock tick down, wishing I could freeze time. But it ended as it always does, despite us. We pushed out onto Carlton Street, picked up some street meat, climbed into our Ford Explorer, and drove away from that magical place back to the suburbs. But my mind stayed there, in the gardens, dreaming of one day playing on that hallowed ice as an NHL star. In retrospect, those dreams seem completely ridiculous. But I thought about those moments as Doug and I wrote this book together. I sat next to him at Originals Ale House in Leaside week after week, listening to the stories of his life. We spoke about his family and youth in Kingston, and I could see that really he'd been just like me, just like so many of us. Doug was a dreamer whose dreams came true, and I came to realize so was I, in a much different way, of course, but dreams are malleable. They may bend with time, but the substance remains the same.
And then right at the end.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mom, Dad, Jay, and Jenna, for your love and support, and thank you, Dad. I've stopped the clock in my mind. We're still sitting at the gardens. You're still beside me, and I'm still dreaming because of you.
I found just reading, like I don't normally read the thank yous, but I just found going from that, and it's right after what I just read. Did that hit? It must have hit home with you at that point.
Well, thank you for reading thank yous. I appreciate that.
No problem.
That is one of my. I shared a lot of happy memories with my father, and he passed away a few years ago. When I was writing a book about Pat Quinn, and it was sort of in the middle of that process that I lost him quite quickly, and it was, it's something that obviously still means a lot to me,
right.
And I think about when I write these kinds of stories and get to share them with people. I kind of think that I'm still sharing them with him,
right?
And so when I say though, like I'm sort of being facetious when saying I followed my dreams too, but
right.
In a way I did later on in life dream to be a storyteller, and this opportunity was something he always pushed me into doing and saying, you can do it, you're going to do it. I know one of our last conversations was me being incredibly stressed out because there was this horrible deadline looming of this project that I took on that I probably shouldn't have, and I was sort of losing my mind, and he was like, you're going to get it done, you're going to do it, and I was so now when I think back of it when I write, it's sort of like everything ends up being for him, and I kind of mentioned that sitting in the garden still, that sort of image of just still being beside him, it's still strong in my mind, it still sits there, and it's something that I cherish, so I'm glad I'm able to share that.
Yeah, I thought it was a really moving ending to the book on both fronts, from you and then following up what Doug had said too.
Well, Doug and I had that in common. We talked about it. We talked a little bit about losing our dads and what our dads meant to us. And I could see, even though his relationship with his father was much different than ours, just as I think everybody's relationship with their parents is different, there was some sort of similarity, and we were able to sort of connect, I think, on a level of talking about what we enjoyed with our dads, what we lost in our dads, and what we learned from our dads. And that I think is why there's definitely, and others have mentioned, there's sort of a strong chord of like going back to his dad. And I think that was because that was probably central to our conversation throughout the time that we met.
Yeah, I love what you were saying, because you bring to mind that scene in Almost Famous where the editor's challenging the teenage rock writer. Where are you in the story? Well, now we know. But speaking, you talked about Doug Gilmour and the place he held, but there's obviously a place that he's from, this place where we all spent time. I just wondered how much, having spent some of your early young adulthood years in Kingston, going to Queens, how did that help you understand Doug Gilmour and where he came from? Because it's a unique city.
Yeah, it's a lovely city. It's a city that I love because of the place it held in my growth as a person, and a lot actually. I actually first interviewed Doug years ago when I was at the Queen's Journal, and I nervously got his phone number and called him and had probably a 30-minute conversation with him when he was driving, and I think we just transcribed the interview. I was just like, this is great, we have to transcribe everything. So I went back and read it and actually used some of it in the book. I actually went back and used some of the details and circled back and just made sure I had a couple lines.
About that you were writing?
It was just like an interview of like, what are you up to now? So the story was Cooks to Killer. So it's talking about Cooks Arena back.
Yeah, I should fill that in. There were two arenas sort of in the north part of Kingston, the Cook Brothers Arena and the Wally Elm Arena, which was always derisively called the Wally Gardens, because they were just two absolute dumps, basically outdoor rinks that they basically just slapped four walls up around. Anyway.
And you mentioned just the feeling of hockey in that place. So my own experience there is I played for the Queens hockey team somewhat when I was there as a goalie for a couple of years, and then like everybody else, played on the many outdoor hockey rinks and got a sense of what it was like to go over to RMC and see the frozen lake and everything. So I could imagine everything there, and it's this without being too cliche, it has this heart of what hockey means to people. It kind of exists everywhere there. You can skate behind City Hall downtown and get that feeling, and the Tragically Hip is the soundtrack of the place. So it just feels, it just oozes hockey, and I think that this was a chance to sort of celebrate that. I tried to do a little bit more actually, but I wasn't able to.
And you were probably there when the old Jock Hardy Arena was there too, not the new one, right? When was the new one built?
Well, right now there is no hockey arena at Queens. They play at the Memorial Center, and which kind of makes the success they were having under Brett Gibson, a remarkable team with no full-time coach and no arena, and they made the national championship tournament last year.
That's actually a really good story that what the hockey team's been doing lately, and it's interesting because I did play at Jock Hardy, and it was. I actually didn't know about the history of it until I sort of read a little bit more about the history of hockey in Canada. Even later on, I learned a little bit more about the place. But it was sort of an arena that needed to get torn down. But I took many exams there as well. Yes. But I spent a lot of time at Jock Hardy, and so my hockey life ended in Kingston. But I think my opportunity to write about hockey began there. So this was sort of a fitting opportunity to talk about Doug, whose story is Kingston in so many ways.
In terms of the book tour, were you following him around with that, or was that once you wrote the book? That was because I was wondering if you did follow him around, what the reaction was like, and what you noticed if you indeed went on it.
Yeah. So I went to a bunch of places in the GTA, in the Toronto area. I didn't head out west or anything like that. Although I know they had a great time. I know it was a lot of fun for them. Mike Miller from HarperCollins got to go along, and he got initiated to the a few pranks from Doug. So he's I know he's still, I think, recovering from that experience. But in Toronto, I went to probably 4 or 5 events, and I actually just went to sort of stand next to the people from HarperCollins in the background and watch people react. And it's really a unique experience, I think, as a writer, to be able to do that, because this is Doug's book and this is Doug's experience, and so I can sort of be a ghost in the background and sit back and watch people holding it and waiting to meet him.
Right.
And in Orangeville it was remarkable. Orangeville, I met with him beforehand, had a couple of beers beforehand with some of my friends just to sort of interact. We went over to the hockey rink, and the lineup. It's a newer rink. I hadn't been there before, but the lineup was like, it's one of those multi rink complexes, and it was like through the whole atrium, and it was going on for he was probably there for 3 hours signing, and it was nonstop people coming to meet him. And I just realized what it meant, and actually it kind of made me nervous. I was like, oh my goodness, I hope they like this book, because they clearly like him a great deal. And he met every single one, stood up, shook their hands, took photos. I know he was exhausted after, because he had just driven the night before. He was in Montreal for a signing. He drove all the way to Orangeville directly and then went home after. And so it's a pretty long day, and he signed for 3 hours and didn't sort of turn anybody away. So it was remarkable to see how. And it was young kids and old and sort of dads bringing their kids, right? And so just to see the impact he still has on hockey fans was remarkable.
And I wonder, to what extent is his kind of life story almost sort of story about the modernization of the NHL? Because Neil and I were realizing this. Like, when you put his career 83 to 2003, it falls like dead even on either side. Like the last 10 years before Gary Bettman becomes commissioner, the first 10 years after, he goes from a league where, the St. Louis Blues are bouncing checks to their players to where,
he
guys
can't
are
even
starting
keep his own jersey.
Yeah, he couldn't take his own jersey home, and
then by the end, he's trying. Wasn't he trying to negotiate? I don't think is that in the book where he tried to get U.S. money, wasn't he? Trying to get his currency converted to the U.S.
Oh, he might have been, at the very end. Yeah, he. Well, it's interesting because you're absolutely right about that sort of this. It's this sort of this era that he sort of crosses over, because he Harry Arnest made the Blues pay for their own like flights home after they lost in a series. Like, there's just all kinds of stuff that just wouldn't fly today, and you just sort of see this the modernization and sort of the economic realities of pro sport sort of emerging in the early 90s. But I can't off the top of my head think of what his first contract was, but it was like,
I think he said 85,000.
Yeah, 85,000 or something, and it was
$1,000 every 2 weeks or something.
And it was weird because he was talking to me about the very first his rookie season, about sort of having to budget and being very concerned about money. And it's hard now to think about a hockey player being in a situation. So I was just trying to think about that. I was trying to contemplate that, but then you realize that he wasn't making the kind of money that players make now, and so that really changed. And then he obviously, they had an interesting contract with the Toronto Maple Leafs with him and Cliff Fletcher, where the milk commercial that he did, all of those contracts were sort of built into his contracts with the Leafs. So a lot of interesting things were happening at that time.
Yeah, you probably have to be, in those early years when he first started in the league, you were probably Wayne Gretzky to have a commercial, right? You probably. I don't know, was any Star of the Leaf on a major campaign like that?
Yeah, in the Harold Ballard era, he was kind of always very stingy about letting the Leaf logo being used for everything. I remember there was criticism one time because I think they got Wendell Clark and Lloyd Moseby to do a PSA about clearing the ice off your sidewalks, and Moseby did the thing in his full Blue Jay uniform, and Wendell Clark was wearing this generic blue hockey uniform because Ballard wouldn't authorize the Leaf logo, and it's the legacy of that. If you go in the College Street subway station,
yes.
There doesn't say Toronto Maple Leafs on that mural that Ken Danby painted.
Right. I didn't even know. I didn't even realize that was the reason. Wow.
There's a competition in all athletes by nature, and I've seen it when I've talked to some people off the record that have books out, and they're like, "This book's ahead of my book. I wanna beat that guy." Is there a competition? We can talk about the authors, but do you feel like some of these subjects want to have their book beat maybe another guy on the bestseller list on the Globe?
That's interesting. For us, with Doug, I don't know that he really can. I think he obviously wants to succeed, and the book did really well. I think for us, the target, and we talked a little bit about it, was maybe sort of competing with Wendell and Ty Domi, whose book came out, because they're friends and they're people who were Leafs as well. So I think there was a bit of built-in, but it was all friendly competition. Right. In doing these things, you can never tell fully how a book's going to do, and you can't really bank your measure of success on it. You have to be satisfied in knowing the book was written to the best of both parties' abilities, and that we're proud of it, and let the rest of it speak for itself. So I want it to be number one, and I was excited when it was. It was really thrilling to see people go out there and buying it. But for Doug, it's just in their day in his life. So for just people coming up and talking to him and buying something that that he's promoting is sort of just what he's been doing for years.
Can you give us a glimpse, and you don't have to go into exact numbers, but how does the finance work on something like this? Is the subject, in this case Doug Gilmour, paid a certain fee, and then the percentage of the book sales, and how does it work? Like how does it all break down between author, subject, and how the sales work?
It's always a little bit different, and it sort of depends on on how we negotiate things and sort of what kind of basically where the publisher is in terms of what they're able to pay for the book. I mean, in this situation, sort of there's an advance fee that the way it would work is that the publisher, HarperCollins, would have a contract with Doug where there'd be an advance fee for that, and then within that I would negotiate a writing fee out of that. So sometimes you can work in the different areas like royalties on the back end or royalties up front, but that all sort of depends on the circumstances. It's not really set in stone. It really comes down to the agreement that you have with the person and sort of how you view. Both parties are kind of figuring out what's the book going to do and what's the best economic situation for what it will take to get it done and for where it will go. But yeah, it's usually in advance, and then enough copies are sold, then you can earn.
So if it's a bestseller, you're not complaining. You're not just writing a book and going, I hope everyone just appreciates it, even if it's bought or not.
No, I mean this is a financial decision. Obviously, getting involved in a book like this, and I'm happy with how the book went, and we were, it's. HarperCollins, I think, and the way they look at these books, like they know there's a market for a book like this, and they'll do their research. I mean, this isn't well, for me, it's a literary pursuit.
Right.
For publishers, it's largely a business pursuit, and they've done the math. So it's difficult. I mean, for example, for a book like Clint Malarchuk's book that I'm really proud to have worked on, and is one of the greatest experiences of my writing opportunities. That book up front would have had a less guarantee to sell, and it did sell well. It did well, but that really had to depend on how we sold it, the story, and everything. So we had the agreements in that would be different than mine with Doug.
Yeah, and that actually sort of maybe segues into my next question, which was we had Stacey May Fowles on in the first season, and she included, of course, your magazine feature on the boys from Herring Cove, these boys from the far north coming down to Ontario to play hockey, and just what the sacrifices they make. But I just wondered, when it comes to subjects of books versus subjects of magazine articles, is there a variation between what people will take 30 minutes to read versus what they'll pay $30 to have a hardcover copy of?
Yeah, I mean, I was honored to be included in that book, and I think everyone should pick it up. The best magazine sports writing that Stacey May was an editor on. That was just an incredible collection. But yes, the answer to that is there is definitely a difference in the. It's not in the what kind of book should be written. I think every story could be a book. I think that it's just a matter of the opportunity and the fact that there's a lot more cost that goes into writing a book than there is into a magazine story. So I would say that a story like the story about her traveling with a group of boys from the far north to Toronto is an interesting story. But it can only serve so much in that people don't know who they are, and generally to sell a book, sort of you have to know the subject in some capacity. There's definitely sort of a calculated math in that, knowing that people want to sit down and read about somebody that they can recall the memories to. So if there's a book about a player there's certain things you want to know about and know a little bit more about, and that's going to carry over a book. Whereas other books, for them to catch on, they just really have to, get the right amount of press and get the right kind of connection to a story, and that's harder to hit than it is to sort of say, what, I'm going to take a guy like Doug Gilmour. People know who he is. There's sort of a built-in mechanism there.
You're an English Lit major.
Yes. Yeah.
So, touching on that, Glenn Stout. Are you familiar with Glenn Stout?
Very familiar. Yeah.
Glenn Stout, and I'm paraphrasing, he's of course the series editor for Best of American Sports Writing, and I read a quote, and paraphrasing, that he said, in order to write great narrative nonfiction, you have to read good fiction.
Yeah.
Is that, do you find that the case, being an English Lit major has helped you? Because I mean, let's be honest, there's a lot of people, there's college programs out there right now for people that just want to go in and focus on sports, but is there a kind of a romance that's lost or anything, or maybe a romance that's gained by having an English Lit major, a way to tell the story, perspective that you think you may have?
I think that an understanding of good stories is essential. So I've read obviously a ton of literature because of English Lit, but that was at school, it almost ruined it for me.
Right.
Because it was either like, well, talk about the criticism of this. Right. And I was just actually interested in the story and then telling the story. So I think I definitely carried a lot of what I learned just through reading, internalized it without really consciously thinking about it. And I do think it's important. I do think it's important to tell a good narrative story, that you understand narrative and that you're moved by narrative and that you can sort of embrace it. So I think it definitely has helped. I hope it's helped inform what I do.
Building on that, Sportsnet the magazine is no longer.
Yeah.
But do you think its creation and the fact that it did exist, do you feel like it's fed a culture of long form in Canadian sports media right now?
I certainly hope so. I mean, I think there's a lot of examples of long form coming out of the United States, great examples of long form. But I think that within the Canadian marketplace, there wasn't anything like that. There's some great newspaper writers doing some long form narratives, great magazine writers doing stuff in the Walrus and other places. But Sportsnet magazine gave us a home where we were able to focus on it every 2 weeks. We're able to write at least one long form story that help us connect to that literary side of us. And right now, the magazine's gone, but a lot of us still work for Sportsnet, and every week we do a thing called the Big Read, which comes out, and it's actually one of the most read stories on our site every week, top 3 consistently. And that says a lot about the appetite for quality, I would say quality storytelling. And I think that I hope that people enjoy that and are continuing to look for that.
Speaking of quality long form, your most recent piece, What It Takes, I believe that's the title,
yes,
right? For the Kevin Stevens piece. I feel like a lot of people really, probably more than long form, really get into a good feature piece, and they might see the feature before they even read the story. It's never the other way around, really, is it? I feel like you never see a good feature piece and then someone writes a story about it. I feel like it's always based on based on a good long form piece. If you look at the Harrison Brown story,
yes,
same thing. I think Christina Rutherford had done a story, and there's numerous examples, but it's never for me. I've never noticed the chicken and the egg with that thing.
It's a good point. I mean, I know that I've been lucky to work with our features television team at Sportsnet several times. I did it on that the story about traveling with the hockey team, and I did it in the Stevens case as well. And I think what works is that the experience of sitting down and working on a long form story like this is very in depth, and it's not artificial in any way. So it's a conversation where you're trying to get and with interviews you're trying to get just the raw truth, pull out all of the details. The reality of telling a story visually requires it's not artificial, but you're set up in a stage. You have to. There's some element of performance to it, just by the nature of the medium. And so I think that when you do the process of the long form interview first, the long form story that can get to that story in a literary way, I think it can help inform a documentary style piece in a different way, because the information's already there. You can pull a little further and ask for it, and also in some cases the subject's a little more comfortable. I've already talked about this, therefore I can talk about it on the camera. We did that with Clint Malarchuk when I went down and did a long form story with him in a couple of days where he just kind of poured his heart out. This is before the book came out. When I did a story for Sportsnet magazine, I went back and did a TV piece, and on that in that interview he starts crying talking about this stuff. But I had the ability to go back to the place and ask the questions we'd already asked, because we had a trust already. So it allowed us, I think, to have a more vulnerable interview.
Right.
And I just wondered, there used to always be the stereotype, the firewall between the people who talk on camera and the people with the keyboard, but I don't think that's ever true. I worked with Earl McRae in Ottawa, and he was like the biggest ham that ever hammed, right?
For sure.
Sorry, Earl. Earl's with us. He's listening in from the great beyond. I just wondered how much. What did you have influences when it came to sort of doing the documentary style thing, like coming from a writing? I mean, you mentioned the transition from a writing background, but who did you sort of look at when you were trying to think about people who could maybe sort of influence your style or say, okay, he's doing it well, I need to take a little of that?
Well, I think the obvious answer is Stephen Brunt, who I think of as an important mentor in my life, who I talk to a lot. I've given him books to review, like just behind the scenes, and we had conversations about his transition into a lot of the visual storytelling that he's been doing at Sportsnet, which is great, his sort of essay style. I mean, he has a unique voice, literally in his writing and literally in his voice, to sort of capture something. And looking at that, I think that's something I'd strive to do. And I look at the way he's, I think, able to bring the art of writing to writing for broadcast, writing for documentary style work, and interviewing for documentary style work. I think it's something that I think all, any journalist that's looking to sort of do a cross-platform kind of thing should look to. So I think he's definitely been the most direct influence in that regard, because I've just spoken to him about it. But I mean, there's a lot of great examples in the States as well for that.
Well, Dan, I think we're just about running out of time here, so I want to ask you, what are your upcoming projects? What's in the hopper for you right now in terms of feature writing and maybe another book?
Well, I just finished Kevin Stevens, and I do have another book that we're working on, but I can't announce it just yet. I'm sorry.
You want to break news here on SportsLit?
I unfortunately can't. I have to get permission to do it, but it will be announced very soon. But I will say that I have a project coming out next fall that I'm sort of signing on to do, and I'm excited to jump into it. I'm actually about to take a leave from Sportsnet to get it done, so I'm going to be off from Sportsnet for several months just to get it done.
Well, we hope you'll join us to talk about whatever that project is.
I would be happy to.
Well, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.